This is my 908 Lessons Learned reflection. When I started on this journey with the Masters in Innovation and Entrepreneurship, I really didn't know exactly what it was that I was planning to do. My goal really was just to look at entrepreneurship and innovation and see what might end up happening in that process. And when we were given the 908 project to do, even then, I wasn't really sure of exactly what it was that I wanted to do at the end of it. So originally, my thought was that perhaps to do something more business related, like reimagining your business, especially since COVID had hit. It was something that was quite interesting and fascinating to me, is how many of the organizations out there were able to survive during the pandemic. But on reflection, that seemed like a very big project and something that would have taken more time than I probably would have had to devote to it. So I went back to sort of my comfort zone and something that I'm fairly knowledgeable about, and that's the careers area. So I shifted. I shifted from reimagining your business to reimagining your career, which is what I really resonated with me. And as part of all that, I came up with this idea called the shift method. Well, why the shift method? Well, because many of the conversations that I had with people were kept talking about a shift in thinking, a shift in the career that they wanted. That was the change that they were talking about. They needed to make a shift. In my webinar that I did, I said the shift is almost like having a gear shift, where you move back and forth. You put it into neutral. Sometimes we're in neutral. Sometimes we're in drive. Sometimes we're in reverse. And so that was kind of an analogy that I kind of used when I was in the webinar. But that's how I came up with this shift method. So this is the website that was created for the shift method, which actually aligns very nicely with my workbook. So the workbook was really the big project. That was the number one thing that I really focused on. Now, how did that come about? Well, that's interesting. One of the things that we do in the classroom when we teach the careers courses is we tell students to do some personal branding. But how can you actually brand yourself if you're really not sure what it is that you want? Because you can't really go somewhere if you don't know what it is that where you want to go. So the Reimagine Your Career was sort of is like a precursor to the careers courses that we teach, or for anyone who is thinking about embarking on a career. This would be a really good place to start. So the workbook, which is quite intensive, is also based on the Agile project management approach. Why that? Well, the reason I thought that that would be interesting is because one of the things that project management does have is scrums, which is an accountability tool. And that is something that I feel is really missing in the career development courses that I've taught. Yes, students do the assignments, and yes, they do complete them, but that's it. There's no accountability. We don't know, once they've done all that, whether in fact they are actually living what it is that they wanted to do. They do it because they have to get grades. Well, this is a little bit different. This is about your life. This is about really making an impact for yourself. So we went through, and I went through this process and created this workbook that has a number of elements that would be in other career type books, but also some new things, like the motivation chart that I have in here. What really motivates you? I think that's a very important element. The other thing that I think is really interesting that I have in this particular workbook is also the visualization board, to visualize what it is that you would like to see. I did have a conversation with some students, and the things that I said was, put in there if you want to have a Maserati or whatever it is, or a house, or wherever that is, or maybe a company logo of a company that you'd like to be working for. This is your visualization board. This is your opportunity to kind of see where you would like to see your life go. So that was the workbook. In addition to the workbook, I created a webinar. I had a webinar on July the 30th. There were about 38 people in attendance. And then I did some feedback because it's incredibly important to get feedback after you create something like this. And the feedback was quite interesting. Yes, there weren't a lot of people that responded, but those who did gave me interesting feedback. Now, this is really interesting. This one individual, there's one individual who, for whatever reason, did respond, but clearly wasn't at the event. So they basically said no to a lot of things. So I kind of take that with a grain of salt, and I've kind of pushed that aside to say that that's not really valid information. But I did look at all the other things that came up. So many of the students, or that, because it was a group of students that I had come, I had a group of HR students that are currently looking to embark on their careers, and I had a group of students that have just completed my careers course, so that they had some knowledge about exactly what this shift method might mean to them. So I had the webinar, and the interesting things that had come up that I think really made some sense was sort of the payment. There were sort of two different payments that I said. How much would you pay for a one-on-one sessions? Well, interestingly enough, I had 30% of the respondents actually say they'd pay $79 monthly for a 1-year contract. And I also had the $99 for 5 sessions here. So I think that was kind of interesting. Then I also did, would you be interested in taking the online course? And 90% of them said they would. And how much would you pay? So with the online course, it was $99 for 5 sessions plus 5 one-on-one sessions. So if the course were developed on an online basis, there would be 5 actual courses, and then I would have 5 one-on-ones. So again, part of the lessons learned is which makes more sense. Well, obviously, the $79 monthly for a 1-year contract would be better, but I think this is probably a better model where I could just have the online courses and then set up 15-minute scrums with the individuals to see where they are within the progress of their career development. And I also asked about the workbook, and many really liked the workbook. They thought that was very involved, and this is probably the more important question to me, which I'd like to mention, is was this workbook different from the personal branding workbook that we use in the classroom? And the response was yes, and that was really positive for me, because that was the ultimate goal from the beginning. So what are my lessons learned? Well, there are 3 key lessons that I learned. Lesson number 1, don't be afraid. Don't be afraid to try something, even if you are not 100% sure of exactly where it's going to take you. I think that was a really important lesson. When I first started working on the shift method, all I knew is that I should create a workbook. What that was going to look like, I didn't know. So I did a little bit of research and found other workbooks out there, and then figured out how to differentiate mine. The second is to really have an action plan, which is what I'm working on at the moment. I need to have an action plan where I know about the marketing side of it. So I have some ideas as to what I'm going to do next, which is I'm going to have a blog. I'm going to have a Facebook page. I'm going to start promoting it through Facebook and also LinkedIn. But also, which I think is even more critical, is to build relationships. Building those relationships with outside organizations that might be interested in having me come in and do a session, a webinar for their people, whether they're students or whether they're maybe in the HR department, really thinking exactly what department they might like to be in. That's another opportunity. But find those partnerships, and those I think will help promote the shift method. And lastly, I think what is really important in the lessons learned is that this is a journey. This is the beginning of a longer process. This is about again, reimagining my career and how I would like to take it forward. How can I incorporate this into the current things that I do? How can I manage doing this effectively and make an impact? I think that was also part of the lessons learned. So there's lots of things that I learned through this process. I'm very pleased that I was able to do this. I'm very proud of the workbook. I think the workbook looks amazing. I think it has some really valuable information in it, and I think it can be used effectively by those who are interested in looking at their careers. So thank you for this wonderful opportunity, and I'm excited to take the next steps.